Welcome to Grieflit Tales. I'm glad you're here. Tonight's story begins in the quiet cold of December, where a tired mother tried to hide her worries, and a little girl saw
snow drifted sideways across the dim December sky, the kind of wind that hummed through the pine boards of Rule's tree farm and made every breath shimmer like a fragile promise. Leora Hale tightened her borrowed coat around her as she steadied the small, uneven Christmas tree she'd chosen, one she prayed would not look as thin as it felt when she carried it home. She told herself the tree was charming, told her daughter it was perfect. But the truth pressed inside her ribs like a bruise. She could afford only what remained on the last row, the ones families passed without even slowing down. And though she wore a careful, gentle smile, the ache behind it flickered like a candle, fighting to stay alive. Mara walked beside her, boots too big, scarf unraveling at the edge. She hummed a tune she made up on the spot, a quiet melody that wrapped around her mother like a small, warm hand. Leora cherished that sound. It softened the hunger in her chest, the hunger for rest, for certainty, for a life not measured in coupons and late notices. Still, she kept moving as though purpose alone could hold her steady. They reached the old oak at the edge of the farm, and Mara's humming stopped. Her mittened hand tugged sharply at Leora's coat. "Mama," she whispered, voice trembling not with fear, but with something gentler. "That man looks sad." Leora followed her daughter's gaze. Under the naked winter tree sat a man on a wooden bench, snow gathering on the dark wool of his coat. His posture was too still, his face angled downward in a way that did not speak of thoughtfulness, but of deep, private exhaustion. Even from a distance, something about him felt misplaced, like a man who once belonged to a brighter world, but had been quietly shut out of it. "We shouldn't stare," Leora murmured, adjusting her grip on the tree. She wanted to walk away. She had no space left for someone else's sadness. But Mara didn't move. She watched the stranger with the wide-eyed tenderness of a child who believed all pain could be soothed if someone simply offered warmth. The wind pressed cold against Leora's cheek. The tree leaned awkwardly on her shoulder, its needles brushing her collar. And she felt suddenly, painfully visibly, another tired woman struggling through Christmas with almost nothing in her pockets. She wished she could hide her worries as easily as snow hid the dirt underfoot. "Mama," Mara whispered again, her small voice cracking slightly. "Can we share our tree with that sad man?" The question landed softly, but its echo rippled through Leora's chest with startling force. She opened her mouth to tell her daughter Nobi, because people kept to themselves. Because kindness sometimes startled strangers. Because she barely had enough to share between the two of them. But the words tangled in her throat, and all that came out was a small exhale of warmth into the freezing air. Mara was already taking a step forward. "Wait," Leora said, but the protest was flimsy, paper-thin. Her daughter's innocence carried more weight than her fear. When they approached, the man startled slightly, as though he hadn't realized the world still moved around him. His eyes, dark, sharp, were lifted to meet Mara's. Something shifted there. Something almost like the first crack in a sheet of winter ice. He wasn't old, maybe late 30s, with the kind of face that once held strength, but now seemed carved by loss. "This is our tree," Mara said softly, lifting one small branch. "You can borrow a little joy from it." Leora felt her heart knot, embarrassed by the simplicity of the offering, but the man did not laugh or recoil. Instead, he blinked as though learning how to breathe again. "Thank you," he said, the words carrying a roughness that hinted he had used his voice for anything gentle in a long while. "That's very kind." He touched the branch lightly, as if afraid to bend it. Snowflakes gathered in his hair, melting slowly along the edges of his jaw. For a moment, the world hushed, the wind, the distant chatter, even Leora's restless thoughts, since she felt something warm slipped quietly into that silence. Old Man Rule passed by them, nodding in acknowledgement. But his eyes lingered on the stranger with an expression Leora couldn't read. Recognition, maybe. Concern, perhaps. She filed it away without thinking. The details small, but curious enough to glow faintly in her mind. "Do you need help carrying it?" the man asked, gesturing to the tree. Leora almost refused out of instinct. Pride was a stubborn thing, clinging even when the world frayed around the edges. But he didn't offer the way others sometimes did, with pity or assumption. His tone held no presumption, no expectation, only sincerity. She breathed out slowly. "Thank you," she said. He lifted the tree easily, his hands steady, controlled, as though he'd handled much heavier things. Mara skipped ahead, clearing a path through the snow, while Leora walked beside the stranger, her steps cautious but strangely comforted. They set the tree near Rule's bonfire, where flames flickered in amber waves, casting soft, golden halos across the snow. Aiden Shi would learn his name moments later handled the tree with careful, deliberate movements. He straightened the trunk, trimmed the uneven base at Rule's quiet instruction, brushed away the sawdust like a man performing a small ritual he remembered from another life. Mara Leora whispered, "Say thank you." "I already did," her daughter replied. Grinning, and Aiden's lips curved faintly, though her smile reminded him the world still had light in it. Warm cider was poured into paper cups. Mara cradled hers like treasure. Leora held hers with both hands to hide their trembling. Aiden accepted a cup, but didn't drink right away. He simply watched the steam rise, eyes softening. "My father used to bring me here every year," he said quietly. "We'd pick the tallest tree in the back row." His breath caught not dramatically, just enough to thread the air with honesty. "This is my first Christmas without him." Leora lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry," she murmured. The words held depth because she understood loss not as an idea, but as a constant companion. He glanced at her, studying the weariness in her eyes, the careful lines of restraint in her smile. "And what about you? You looked tired when you arrived." She almost lied, almost brushed it off with a polite laugh. But something about his voice, steady, observant, gentle, brought down one of her inner walls. "I lost my job 2 months ago," she said. "I'm holding things together the best I can." Their truths met in the space between them like two small lanterns placed side by side. No melodrama, no confessions. Just two people acknowledging the quiet weight of their own lives. Snow began to fall thicker, blurring edges, softening shapes, and the world tightened around them into a circle of warmth and flickering light. Mara leaned against Aiden's arm without hesitation, and he steadied her instinctively, the gesture so natural it startled Leora's breath. For a moment, brief, delicate, almost unreal, they felt like a small constellation that had found itself by accident. But the warmth was interrupted by a sudden gust of wind that sent sparks swirling upward. An old man Rule called across the fire, "Leora, a moment." His voice carried something heavy, something knowing. She followed him a few steps away, glancing back to see Aiden brushing snow from Mara's coat with quiet patience. Rule leaned in, his voice low, careful. "You know who that is, don't you?" he murmured. "That's Aiden Cross, the CEO, the one from the headlines. The world beneath." Leora's feet shifted not violently, but deeply. The tree, the bonfire, the falling snow all blurred as a single realization struck her with quiet force. The sad man her daughter had tried to comfort was someone she was never meant to stand beside. And as she turned to look at him and at the gentle way he held her daughter, her heart stumbled at what this revelation might mean. Snow hissed softly against the apartment windows the next morning, a delicate sound that should have brought peace, yet Leora felt a coldness inside her that the blankets couldn't warm. Old Man Rule's words echoed through her mind with quiet thorns. Aiden Cross, CEO headlines, a man whose world was carved from privilege and power. She tried to push the thought away, tried to remember the gentle way he had steadied Mara near the bonfire, but the revelation clung stubbornly, whispering that she'd overstepped, that she'd offered kindness too. someone far outside the circles she belonged to. Mara, however, held no such heaviness. She hummed as she arranged a paper star on the table. "Mama," she said, "do you think the sad man found some joy last night?" Leora paused halfway through knotting her robe. I hope so." But even as she spoke, fear curled hot in her chest. She feared embarrassing him. She feared looking naive. She feared the fragile warmth between them had been an illusion born from winter lights and shared grief. And underlying it all was the quiet terror that if she let someone close, the world might take them away. Tua's life had taken so much already. A knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Gentle, hesitant. Leora froze. Through the small peephole she saw him. Aiden stood in the hallway, snow melting along the collar of his coat, a modest box tucked under his arm. He didn't look like a CIOno tailored suit. No polished shoes, only a man carrying something he wasn't entirely sure he was allowed to offer. Leora opened the door slowly. "You found us," she said, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. "I'm sorry to drop by unannounced," he said, the apology honest, not perfunctory. "I realized you mentioned having trouble with the lights. I had some extras at home." He lifted the box slightly. "If you'd like help, I'm here." Fear tugged sharply at her. She wanted to protect the boundaries of her small, fragile dignity. She wanted to tell him she could manage. But Mara squealed, threw on her slippers, and opened the door wider with both hands. "Please come in," she said, already dragging the box toward the tree stand. Aiden stepped inside gently, as though entering a place he didn't want to disturb. He removed his gloves, placing them carefully on the windowsill. His movements were deliberate, almost reverent, as if he understood instinctively that small homes carried tender histories. He knelt beside the tree, examining the tangled wires. "This part is easy," he murmured, his voice low and calming. "Lights can look hopeless, but most of the time, they just need patience." Leora watched him work. He wasn't commanding, wasn't performing, wasn't trying to impress. He simply existed quietly within the moment, matching the fragile stillness of the home around him. Yet beneath his calm, she sensed a thread of his own fear. Fear of intruding. Fear of misreading the invitation. Fear that any warmth he felt last night might have been something he imagined. When he plugged in the first string, a soft golden glow bloomed across the tree's branches, transforming the sparse needles into something almost luminous. Mara gasped. Leora's breath caught in her throat. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Aiden looked at her then, not at the tree, not at the lights at her. The gentleness in his gaze unsettled her more than any title, any headline ever could. Because this wasn't the look of a CEO, it was the look of someone who had been lonely for a very long time. But warmth, when it begins to rise, often pulls old fears to the surface. Leora stepped back, her hands tightening around the edge of her sweater. "I didn't realize who you were until last night," she said quietly. "I should have. I'm sorry if my daughter and I overstepped." Aiden froze, the glow of the lights reflecting faintly across his features. "Overstepped," he repeated, voice soft and pained. "Leora, your kindness was the first real thing I felt in months." She swallowed, guilt washing through her. "I just don't want you to feel obligated to." "I don't," he interrupted gently. "I came because it felt right, and because your daughter reminded me of the world my father wanted me to see. A world where people still reach out." His honesty struck her like a warm wave breaking over cold stone. Something inside her trembled not with rejection this time, but with the fragile possibility of belonging. Mara climbed onto the couch, already drifting into a nap beneath a knitted blanket, leaving the room wrapped in a hush that felt sacred. Aiden rose slowly, wiping his hands on his coat. "If my being here makes you uncomfortable," he said, "I'll go. But I meant it when I said your company helped me yesterday." Leora stared at the tree, now glowing softly, transforming the entire room into a place that felt warmer than anything she'd known for months. Fear told her to step back. Loneliness told her she had stepped back for too many years already. She looked at him, this man who carried grief with quiet grace, who had knelt by her daughter without hesitation, who had returned not with grandeur, but with lights in a cardboard box. "Would you like to stay for a cup of tea?" she asked, barely above a whisper. He exhaled, relief softening his entire posture. "I'd like that." They sat at the small kitchen table, 2 mugs steaming between them, the glow of the newly lit tree filling the apartment with a tender, amber stillness. They talked in low voices about childhood memories, about the things grief teaches, about how a single moment of kindness can redirect an entire season. The afterglow settled into the room like snow settling onto branches, slow, gentle, undeniable. And just as Leora began to believe the warmth might last, just as hope began to creep into the quiet spaces of her heart, a vibration buzzed in Aiden's coat pocket. He glanced at the screen. His expression shifted, subtle but unmistakably troubled. He silenced the phone without answering. But Leora had already seen the name flashing across the screen. It was a name tied to the headlines she had tried so hard not to read. A name that whispered that whatever fragile peace they'd found here was about to collide with the world he could not escape.